Mr. Speaker.
E te atua kaharawa, ka tuku whakamoemeti atu mātou mona karakia ko waihotia mai ki runga i a mātou. Ko waiho i o mātou pānga whai ora katoa ki te taha, ka mihi mātou ki te kingi me te inoi atu, mo te arihitanga i roto i o mātou whakaaroarohanga. Kia mōhio ai, kia whakahiti ai tā mātou whakahaere i ngā take o te wharenei, mo te oranga, te maungarongo me te aroha o Aotearoa. Āmeni.
I'm sure members would want to join with me to wish welcome to the visiting members of the State Great Chorale of Mongolia, including the chair of the Mongolia-New Zealand Friendship Parliamentary Organisation, Mr. Ernbald Shakwata, and their delegation who are present in the gallery. Six petitions have been delivered to the clerk for presentation.
Petition of Brian Webb requesting that the House require early childhood centres to have cameras that record all interactions between children and caregivers. Petition of Before 16 Charitable Trust requesting that the House pass online safety legislation for children that includes a minimum age of 16 for social media access. Petition of Mackenzie Dowell requesting that the House require that cosmetics and beauty products list allergens by plain English names rather than scientific names. Petition of Nick Ruane requesting that the House urge the Government to increase funding for the Total Mobility Scheme. Petition of Renee Jens requesting that the House urge the Government to pause the emissions trading scheme for industry and remove the emissions trading scheme for electricity generation. Petition of Lily Foster requesting the House urge the Minister of Education to retain art history for Year 12 and 13 students as a standalone subject.
Those petitions stand referred to the Petitions Committee. Ministers have delivered 63 papers.
2024-25 annual reports of the Accreditation Council, Auckland Light Rail Limited, Civil Aviation Authority and Aviation Security Service, the Classification Office, the Commerce Commission, the Department of Conservation, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, Fire and Emergency New Zealand, the Health and Disability Commissioner, Health New Zealand, Health Quality Safety Commission, the Human Rights Commission, the Independent Police Conduct Authority, Kiwi Rail Holdings Limited, Te Papa Tongarewa, the New Zealand Artificial Limb Service, the New Zealand Blood and Organ Service, New Zealand Film Commission, New Zealand Growth Capital Partners Limited, New Zealand Lotteries Grants Board, New Zealand Railways Corporation, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, Ngārimu VC and the 28th Māori Battalion Memorial Scholarship Fund Board, New Zealand Transport Agency, Outdoor Access Commission, Radio New Zealand, Research and Education Advanced Network New Zealand, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the Sport Integrity Commission, Sport New Zealand Group, the Takeovers Panel, Te Māngai Pāho, the Tertiary Education Commission, the Transport Accident Investigation Commission, Tupu Tonu, Whakaata Māori and WorkSafe New Zealand. Erratum to the 2024-25 annual reports of the Department of Conservation and the Parliament sector. Government responses to the petition of Heather Tangway and the petition of Minaz Ali. To the Social Services and Community Committee's report on the petition of Safeguarding Children, the report of the Māori Affairs Committee on the petition of Deborah Chappell, and the Climate Change Commission's report on the 2050 Target Review recommendations. The International Treaty on the Agreement to establish the Pacific Resilience Facility, together with National Interest Analysis, the 2025 Long-Term Insights Briefing for the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, Reserve Bank of New Zealand's Monetary Policy Statement for August 2025, Monetary Policy Statement for November 2025, Financial Stability Report for November 2025, the 2025-29 Statements of Intent for the Health and Disability Commissioner, the Human Rights Commission, the New Zealand Lotteries Commission and WorkSafe New Zealand, 2025-26 Statements of Performance Expectations for the Health and Disability Commissioner, Health New Zealand, Health Quality and Safety Commission, the Human Rights Commission, Te Papa Tongarewa, the New Zealand Artificial Limb Service, the New Zealand Blood and Organ Service, the New Zealand Film Commission, the Sport Integrity Commission, Sport New Zealand Group and Tupu Tonu, and the State of the Public Service, December 2025.
The bills are set down those papers are published under the authority of the House. 24 Select Committee reports have been delivered for presentation.
Reports of the Economic Development, Science and Innovation Committee on the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism Supervisor Levy and Other Matters Amendment Bill. Review briefing on the 2023-24 annual review of Crown Regional Holdings Limited. Review briefing on the 2023-24 annual review of Landcare Research New Zealand Limited. Review briefing on the 2023-24 annual review of the Real Estate Agents Authority. Reports of the Education and Workforce Committee on the Employment Relations Amendment Bill and the petition of Catherine Lamont. Report of the Environment Committee on the Fast Track Approvals Amendment Bill. Reports of the Governance and Administration Committee on the Local Government System Improvements Amendment Bill, Online Casino Gambling Bill and the Public Service Amendment Bill. Reports of the Health Committee on the briefing from Arthritis New Zealand, Healthy Futures Paiora Amendment Bill, and inquiry into aged care sector's current and future capacity to provide support services for people experiencing neurological cognitive disorders. Reports of the Justice Committee on the Constitution Amendment Bill, the Electoral Amendment Bill, and the report of the Ombudsman, OPCAT report on an examination of prisoners of Extreme Risk Unit under the Crimes of Torture Act 1989. Report of the Māori Affairs Committee on the briefing on accountability settings and outcomes for Māori. Reports of the Petitions Committee on the petition of Christine Gilmore, the petition of Miriam Woon and the petition of Summer Fraser. Report of the Regulations Review Committee on the Secondary Legislation Confirmation Bill number 3. Reports of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee on the petition of New Zealand Equestrian Advocacy Network. Report of the Controller and Auditor General regulating vehicle safety inspections, and review briefing on the 2023-24 annual review of Meridian Energy Limited.
The bills are set down for second reading. The reports of the Controller and the Auditor General, the Ombudsman, the inquiry briefings, etc., and the review briefings are set down for consideration. The Clerk has been informed of the introduction of 9 bills.
Crimes Amendment Bill, introduction. Climate Change Response 2050 Target and Other Matters Amendment Bill, introduction. Public Works Amendment Bill, introduction. Infrastructure Funding and Financing Amendment Bill, introduction. Arms Bill, introduction. Natural Environment Bill, introduction. Planning Bill, introduction. Emergency Management Amendment Bill number 2, introduction. Commerce, Promoting Competition and Other Matters Amendment Bill, introduction.
Those bills are set down for first reading. Members, I've received a letter from Maria Memo Kapakingi seeking to debate under Standing Order 399 public statements by the former Commissioner of Police and both the former and current Ministers of Police regarding former Deputy Commissioner Jiwan McSkimming. Urgent debates are a way of holding the current government accountable for an action for which it is responsible. So an urgent debate cannot be held on matters for which a previous government had some responsibility. Urgent debates are not a means through which to discover what a minister knew or why they said something. That is the role of parliamentary questions. The application is declined. We come to oral question. The first name of Chris Hipkins, the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does he stand by all of his government statements and actions?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes. Supplementary question.
Well, to our friends in the gallery, that was an impromptu performance, a little bit of poetry and lots of performative art as well. I think we'll now progress to questions for oral answer. The first in the name of the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Who actually speaks for the government? The Prime Minister, who says that he wants, quote, modest, consistent house price increases, end quote, or the Housing Minister, Chris Bishop, who says the government is, quote, trying to drive house prices down, end quote?
Well, what this government doesn't want is a 30% growth in house prices in a single year, as we experienced under the last government. House prices have come down, I think about 13% on average. And what we want to see is gradual, moderate, consistent house price growth, while we want to see wage growth obviously growing faster than house price appreciation.
So was Chris Bishop wrong when he said only recently, quote, the government was, quote, trying to drive house prices down, end quote?
Well, what this government is doing is we are radically increasing the supply of land available for housing, and I would just say to that member, I would put our record on housing up against his any day of the week, because housing is more affordable for purchase. Rentals, you just remember house prices went up 30% in a single year under Labor. Rents went up $180 a week. There was 5,000 fewer people now on social housing wait lists under this government. Kids are out of motel rooms, and actually this government's record on housing beats his record any day of the week.
So when Nicola Willis said, quote, I agree with him that house prices need to fall, I'm with him, end quote, was she admitting that her alignment on housing policy is with Chris Bishop and not the Prime Minister?
Well, this is a country that has been experiencing a housing crisis for many, many years, and it's a function of having not enough supply in the market. It is not a demand-side problem, it's a supply-side problem. And that's why I'm very proud of what this government's doing, launching its new RMA reforms today to make sure that we can actually get more houses built for New Zealanders. And I think that member should be thankful that we have actually done a good job of making sure house price affordability is down. That's a good thing. Rentals are down, that's a good thing, not up $180 a week. We've got 5,000 fewer families on the social housing wait list now in housing. We've got 3,000 kids and families out of emergency housing. I'm proud of our record on housing.
Supplementary?
Supplementary, Honourable David Seymour.
Is it the government's desire that wages grow faster than house prices, and that requires sound economic management from this government?
Absolutely, and that's what I was saying in answer to the first question, which is that we want to see wage growth, income growth be faster and higher than house price growth, so it becomes more affordable.
So what is the government's policy position? His position, that the government wants, quote, modest, consistent house price increases. Chris Bishop's position, where he says the government is, quote, trying to drive house prices down, end quote. Or Nicola Willis's position, where she says that she agrees with Chris Bishop that house prices need to fall.
Our position is to unlock growth in this country, to open up more land available for housing so it becomes more affordable. We're not interested in Kiwi Build. Remember that one? Didn't go so good. But what we're interested in doing is systemic reform of our planning laws so that we can get more houses built so they become more affordable for people.
Supplementary question. Is his reluctance to answer the question on whether he speaks for the government on house prices or Chris Bishop or Nicola Willis speak for the government on house prices because he's not sure whether they do actually support his position?
Well, I think the bigger question the member should be concerned about is what's happening with house prices. They are more affordable than they have been under this government in 2 years than they were under his government in 6 years. What's the situation with rentals? They went up $180 a week under his government. They've come down under this government. When you think about the position on social housing, we actually have 5,000 fewer families now on a social housing wait list, and that is a good thing. We've got 3,200 families out of emergency hotels where they were sitting, now in houses, and we're also supporting the homeless as well. I line up our record on every dimension, every component, any day of the week.
Just appreciate that members will be a little unsettled due to the theatrics we experienced at the beginning of question time, but do you have to keep it reasonable? That is true, I'm unsettled. Yeah.
Supplementary
Honourable Chris
question.
Hipkins.
Is he not calling out Chris Bishop for contradicting him on falling house prices and not calling out Nicola Willis for saying that she's with Chris Bishop on falling house prices because she's worried that Nicola Willis is also going to end up with Chris Bishop when he tries to replace him as Prime Minister?
No, look, I'd just say I think the member should worry less about the National Party and worry about his mates in the Greens and Te Pāti Māori, don't you think? I think that's what you should be worrying about, son.
Question 2, Catherine Wedd.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister responsible for RMA reform. What announcements has he made about replacing the Resource Management Act 1991?
The Honourable Chris Bishop. Just hang on. Let him at least get a couple of words out.
Mr Speaker, today the government has announced its new planning system to replace the RMA 1991 to make it easier to build the homes and infrastructure our country needs, give farmers and growers the freedom to get on with producing world-class food and fibre and strengthen our primary sector while protecting the environment. The RMA 1991 has been a failure, has slowed down energy and infrastructure projects and has fuelled a housing crisis in a country the size of the United Kingdom but with only 7% of its population. It has created uncertainty for developers, councils, farmers and growers, yet hasn't protected the environment. The reforms announced today are a once-in-a-generation opportunity to free ourselves from a millstone that has weighed on both our economy and our environment. And of course, the foundation of the new regime is the centrepiece of liberal democracies, property rights.
Supplementary. What are the major features of the new system?
Mr Speaker, the system will need fewer and simpler consents with fewer activity categories, so low-impact activities no longer require consents. We will move from over 100 existing plans to 17 regional combined plans, integrating spatial land use and natural environment planning. Spatial planning means 30-year regional spatial plans to identify growth areas, infrastructure corridors and areas needing protection. There will be clearer national direction and more consistency through nationally set policy direction, and the system will be more proportionate. Consent conditions must be necessary and proportionate, reducing red tape.
Supplementary. What other major features are there?
Mr Speaker, the new planning system will include more standardisation. Planned national standards on zoning and common activities will cut red tape and speed up the system. Consultation will only occur where necessary. Councils will also be required to provide practical relief mechanisms when imposing restrictions on heritage and on things like significant natural areas. A new planning tribunal will deliver faster, low-cost conflict resolution, and it will mean better environmental protection, enabling community decision-making over water quality and improving the efficient use of resources.
Supplementary. What does this mean for New Zealanders?
Mr Speaker, this all adds up to an easier, cheaper system. It means less paperwork, less cost and a faster and easier progress for those who want to do basic things like putting a deck on a house, building a fence on a farm or constructing some townhouses or even Marama Davidson, a wind farm. They mean a planning system that works for New Zealanders and their aspirations rather than against them. More land will be unlocked for housing. Long-term spatial plans will give investors certainty. For farmers, it means less red tape. Farm plans to manage environmental risks. It means making planning simpler, faster and fairer, so we can build homes, grow food, farm animals and deliver the infrastructure New Zealand needs while caring for the environment. Mr Speaker, if we get this right, the 2030s can be New Zealand's decade.
Supplementary, Simon Court.
Minister, how does introducing a regulatory relief mechanism for property owners subject to SNAs, heritage, culture and landscape overlays strengthen private property rights?
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the Under-Secretary for his excellent question. And I just reflect on the fact that at the moment it is costless for councils to impose quite significant controls on private property. I think about my own electorate of Hutt South, where the council imposed significant natural areas, in some cases on 70 to 80 to 90% of people's private land, thus diminishing the value of that land and what they could do with that land. That was costless for the council, but comes at real cost of people and their private property rights. So we are tilting the balance back in favour of property rights by requiring councils to actually think about those things and think about offering regulatory relief in those circumstances. Individual cases and individual councils will vary, but clearly there is a shift in balance back towards the idea of private property.
Minister, how does introducing a planning tribunal strengthen the rights of property owners?
Well, Mr. Speaker, many members of this House will have experienced people who have approached them who are having arguments with their local council about often quite simple things. Again, I think of my own electorate with a man who was arguing for 9 months with the local council about replacing the garage on his house or on his property where there was an existing garage and the council didn't like the design of the new garage. And again, almost every member of this House will have examples of people who've approached them complaining about similar experiences. Now, at the moment, you can go and complain to the council who's creating the problem in the first place, or you can go off to the Environment Court at vast expense, time and money. So the Planning Tribunal sits between the council and the Environment Court and will be like the Disputes Tribunal, which will offer low-cost access to justice for people who are being screwed over by councils. And of course, the whole point is that there'll be less ability for councils to do that because the system will manage fewer things in the first place.
How good?
Question number 3, the Honourable Barbara Edmonds.
Hello, Ogeta, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, does she agree with the Prime Minister's comments about asset sales that, quote, would take it to the election and it would be part of our program, unquote? And if so, what advice, if any, has she received on the Crown's ownership interest in state-owned companies?
The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the Prime Minister's full quote, which was, we'd take it to the election and it would be part of our program that we'd want to talk about and be upfront with New Zealanders about. The government is not selling state assets this term. As Minister of Finance, my job is to ensure the Crown's $500 billion asset base is working for New Zealand. What we are doing is asking whether the assets we own are performing and how we can get better value for taxpayers. When the government took office in November 2023, Treasury proactively advised in its briefing to incoming shareholding and responsible ministers that ministers should consider being clearer about the purposes of the Crown's ownership of several government-owned companies. Treasury noted that, quote, OECD guidelines recommend that countries also set out an ownership policy statement, and many OECD countries do so. Shareholding ministers accepted Treasury's suggestion and have been receiving advice on the ownership purposes of a number of Crown-owned companies. This advice has not been considered by Cabinet.
Supplementary. Has she requested any further advice on options to sell state-owned assets?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, we are evaluating the Crown balance sheet, which I would point out Crown companies are a very small portion of. New Zealanders collectively own many assets, which are social assets, schools, hospitals, houses, roads. And I would point out to the member that it is the case, for example, that on our watch, Kāinga Ora has sold many multi-million-dollar homes in Ponsonby and Herne Bay so that they can reuse the proceeds to build homes in areas of highest need. Similarly, under the last government, Kiwibank sold Kiwi Wealth, releasing $225 million in capital to improve its growth prospects, potentially increasing lending to New Zealanders by 14%.
Point of order, the Honourable Karen McAnulty.
Thank you, Sir. The question was a relatively straightforward one. Has she sought any additional advice? We're none the wiser as to whether that is the case. That particular aspect of the question was not addressed by that long answer.
Well, I think the start was by saying that what the government has decided to do. I think you can go around this stuff forever, but have another sup.
Are all Associate Ministers of Finance receiving all the advice on the ownership interest in state-owned assets? If not, why not?
Depend on the advice, but as I made very clear in my answer to the primary question, all advice will be taken to Cabinet, and Cabinet collectively will make decisions about the ownership statements. That has not yet occurred.
Supplementary. Is it an appropriate use of public sector resources to do the groundwork on asset sales, given the government has ruled out asset sales this term?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I utterly reject that assertion. The member is confusing basic financial stewardship with privatisation, because unlike the previous government, we take seriously our role as stewards of public assets, and we believe it is in the interests of New Zealand taxpayers to ensure they are performing well and to their purpose. And where they are not performing well or to their purpose, you can bet we will be holding their boards and chairpeople to account for lifting that performance on behalf of New Zealanders. You sat back, let them underperform. We won't do that.
Nasty. Supplementary. Will she rule out asset sales while she is Minister of Finance?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Crown has made very clear that we will not be selling Crown companies this term, and what I've also made clear it is the case that we have, for example, sold multi-million-dollar homes previously owned by Kāinga Ora so that we can recycle that capital into better value homes for people in need. This is consistent with the practice of the previous government, which also did the same thing, selling assets owned by Kāinga Ora to put the dollars to better purposes. It is also the case that within entities that the Crown owns, from time to time, they will divest some of their assets in order to better recycle that capital, as is the primary example, Kiwi Wealth, a $225 million asset owned by Kiwi Bank, sold by the previous government, with the proceeds recycled into Kiwi Wealth. Mr Hipkins says that's not true, Mr Speaker. I can assure him the statements I make in this House are accurate.
Supplementary.
Hang on. Question being asked.
Supplementary. How many homes has she funded and built this year from the recycling of the funding from the sales she mentioned in her previous response?
Well, Mr Speaker, that's a question both probably better put to the Minister of Housing and better put in writing. But what I can confirm is that on this government's watch, we have delivered more social homes in our first 2 years in office than the last government did in 3.
Supplementary question. Supplementary question.
Hang on.
Supplementary question.
No, hang on. That will see you leaving the House.
Supplementary question.
Well, if you're going to stand by it, then you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. Think of another way of putting it.
Supplementary question.
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
Can the Minister of Finance confirm that the proceeds from the sale of the house in Trinity Street, Ponsonby, next to Lord's Mansion, has funded the retrofit of six to seven other Kāinga Ora properties in Auckland?
I can confirm that, Mr Speaker, and what I am surprised to also have to confirm to members of this House today is that there are some members here who would prefer we sat on those multi-million-dollar homes in a very expensive part of Auckland than delivering more homes for families in need. I stand by our government's decisions.
The Honourable David Seymour.
Is the Minister of Finance aware of any other investor that's been around for 170 years, like the New Zealand government, that only ever buys and never sells to get a better deal?
Well, Mr Speaker, as the Deputy Prime Minister rightly points out, that would be the worst sort of financial stewardship, and it is a reflection on the economic capability of others if they're to suggest that we should never, ever decide that an asset is no longer serving taxpayers to its best purpose. It has been the case of successive governments that they assess the value of assets and how they are performing.
Question number 4, Chloe Swarbrick. Just wait for the House to give you the courtesy of their silence.
Ki te Premier, e tautoko ana ia I ngā kōrero me ngā mahi katoa a tōna kāwanatanga.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes.
Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for rough sleeping in Auckland nearly doubling between September 2024 and May 2025, during which his government's emergency housing changes came into effect?
Well, as we've discussed before in the House, I'm very, very proud of this government's progress on removing and getting rid of emergency housing and motels. We've been able to move families and kids into dry, warm homes. This is also a government that cares deeply about the challenges of homelessness, and as that member well understands, they saw an increase in homelessness of 37% after spending $1 billion when they were in government. It's a complex issue. We're doing everything we can to work on that too.
Does he accept the community organisations' concerns reflected in the open letter which I passed him before question time today began, that government choices to cut access to emergency housing, cancel state housing developments, cut funding for rangatahi housing support and weaken tenants' rights are directly linked to more Aucklanders sleeping in our streets, our parks and their cars?
Well, as the member has, we've talked before, we have actually met with key stakeholders in Auckland CBD to see what more we can be doing around the the homeless situation there. These are complex issues with people with complex needs, but this is also a government that has opened up 300 more housing first places. We've got 200 of them going into Auckland, and we also now are talking to the NGOs that we partner with to make sure that they are doing everything they can to make sure they are managing vacancies and vacancy management within their own system, by which of course the government is working with them and providing them with contracts to do so. So there is a concerted effort to do everything that we can. But I just ask the member to stop and reflect on the fact that we have 5,000 fewer families on a wait list waiting to get access to a state house or a community housing provided house. We have 3,000 families out of emergency housing and motels after that being a systemic problem for a long period of time, and we should be very proud about that.
Can he guarantee that every single New Zealander experiencing rough sleeping can access emergency housing or whatever support they may need if they were today to walk into a work and income office?
As we've talked before, this is a government that has actually put together 300 more places, housing first places. 200 of them are available in Auckland, and we're also now getting the NGOs to record their vacancy rates daily and weekly so that we can make sure that they are actually delivering those dwellings and those accommodations for the people that need it. But we've also put in place $10 million of additional funding for support services for rough sleepers.
Can he guarantee that every New Zealander who is currently experiencing rough sleeping could today walk into a work and income office and get access to the emergency housing and support services that they need?
Well, as the member is aware, and we've talked about in recent weeks, we've also directed MSD to show greater discretion to support people who are in need. But I'd just say to the member again, when you see housing affordability at the best it's been for a long period of time, when you see rents coming down, when you see people off a social housing wait list, when you see people out of emergency accommodation in motels, and you also see support with 300 more housing first places, $10 million available for rough sleepers, and coordination between government and key agencies, that's good work.
Will the Prime Minister rule out the much discussed move on orders, which community providers have said will result in them struggling to reach homeless rangatahi in Auckland when they are pushed out to further suburbs and afraid to enter the city centre where the services are?
Well, again, as we've discussed this before, the Minister for Auckland has met with other key ministers and agencies. There is a 6-point plan developed in conjunction with Auckland Council and the government and others. We're about housing for rough sleepers. We want increased police and council presence. We want safer public spaces, targeting of criminal behaviour, targeted support services and cleaner streets. And yes, we are exploring move-on orders, and we'll have more to say about that shortly.
Question number 5, Andy Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Oceans and Fisheries and asks, what reports has he received on the fisheries sector?
The Honourable Shane Jones.
Mr. Speaker, I have received a report that shows 87% of our stocks, according to a scientific analysis, are definitely sustainable, and it's backed up by the United Nations. We should remember, sir, that over 9,000 people are employed in this sector, 1.5 billion of exports, and despite the best efforts of my critics, the furry Luddites, we stand strong with this industry.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. How will the fisheries reforms help sustainability and increase the value of fisheries?
Speaker, earlier this year we announced some reforms that will make their way through Parliament during the course of next year. Of course, it's important that we have balance and that when catch limits for our various species of fish are set, that it's driven by science, but also we stand against the demonisation and the tainting of the commercial fishing sector. The rules that will be put in place via our upcoming reforms will be consultative, but they will also enhance science to ensure that sectors seeking to taint this important sector do not get a free pass.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. What actions has the Minister taken to increase exports from the aquaculture sector?
Speaker, our government has, during the course of our rule, as a consequence of far-sighted voters in 2023, extended marine farming permits by 20 years. This enabled the industry and the holders of those permits to dedicate capital, take a risk and grow the footprint of aquaculture in New Zealand. It has been a key improver in terms of productivity, and we will be working very closely as a government in a cohesive fashion to ensure that the RMA reforms identified today do deliver for coastal-based industries.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. And how will those Resource Management Act reforms support the aquaculture sector?
The RMA, as our colleague Minister Bishop stated, is broken. It has become a major drain on productivity. It will provide an opportunity for people to go about their business, celebrate the fact that they have property rights that can be utilised to grow the wealth of the country. We will also ensure that the coastal policy statement, a failed attempt to balance the needs of the coast, does not continue and blight the development opportunities and ensure that ports, aquaculture and other related matters continue to grow. I look forward to the submissions that may come from the industry through the Select Committee process, as I am aware that they hope to see one day a bespoke aquaculture type of legislative outcome to grow that industry.
Question number 6, Rawiri Waititi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by all his government statements and actions?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes.
Did he or the Minister of Police have any knowledge of allegations made against former Deputy Police Commissioner Siobhan McSkimming before November 6, 2024?
In answer to myself, no.
Did he have any knowledge of the allegations made against his former Deputy Chief Press Secretary, Michael Forbes, before June 2025?
No.
Were these cases examples of police negligence, or were he and his ministers being willfully ignorant to the behaviour of their high-ranking colleagues?
No, I'm very proud of the police. I think 15,000 men and women of the police force do an amazing job each and every day. I'm very proud of the work that they've done, removing 38,000 serious violent criminals from New Zealand, serious violent victims of violent crime being down. I'm very proud of the fact they've got 16% lower levels of serious youth offending. Yes, we have 1,900 more people in prison, but they're not out in the community causing pain and suffering to fellow New Zealanders.
Will he commit to initiating a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the New Zealand Police in response to these obvious failures to identify serious misconduct?
No, because this government, as we have moved incredibly quickly to the outcome of what a Royal Commission of Inquiry would generate anyway, which is the strongest statutory oversight mechanism possible, which is, of course, an Inspector General.
Question number 7, the Honourable Dr Aisha Verrill.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Does he stand by all his actions in the health portfolio? If not, why not?
The Honourable David Seymour.
behalf of the Minister of Health, yes, particularly the action of setting targets for delivery in the healthcare system. For too long before this government was formed, governments and ministers tended to show their aroha for the patients by throwing money at the problem rather than setting targets for productivity in order to actually get people the results, the vaccinations and the appointments they need in a timely manner, which is this government's action.
Supplementary, which action does he stand by? His cuts to graduate nursing roles or his partial reversal of those cuts?
Mr Speaker, I can't speak to the Minister's allegations, which seem to be more of an attempt at making social media. What I can say is this government has hired 2,000 additional nurses. I don't know if the member's ever seen 2,000 additional nurses in one place, but that's a lot of nurses.
Does he stand by his plan for digital investment or his unsafe cuts to hospitals' digital systems?
Mr Speaker, I absolutely, on behalf of the Minister, stand by this government's plan to invest in digitisation. And the reason for that, I happened in my own capacity to be visiting Waikato Hospital a time ago, and they explained to me that as an Aucklander, if I was to be in a car crash in Hamilton, I would need to have my records emailed from Auckland, potentially while I was bleeding out on the table. I asked them, didn't the previous government merge the DHBs together? And they said, well, that was just the letterheads. They didn't do the hard work of investing in a patient record. That's what this government is doing. And yes, I stand by that. Yes, I do.
Supplementary, does he stand by decisions to centralise hiring outside of local hospitals, causing months of delay to doctors' recruitments?
Mr Speaker, it is certainly true that under the previous government's centralisation and merger of the DHBs, the hiring of staff had to be routed through Wellington, leading to enormous delays. The Minister of Health has reversed that change and decentralised hiring so that the people at the coalface can make the decisions about who to hire. That is actually an improvement, and I'm starting to wonder, Mr Speaker, if this member's trying to make the government look good.
Is it the case that the Minister is unaware that that decision to centralise hiring outside of hospitals, as well as the cuts to nursing graduate roles and digital infrastructure, were all under that government?
That's right. Mr Speaker, that is simply untrue. The simple facts are 2,000 extra nurses, 600 extra doctors. You can't argue with results.
Mr Speaker.
We come now to question number 8, Cameron Brewer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Economic Growth and asks, what impact will resource management reform have on the economy?
The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Well, Mr Speaker, for too long the Resource Management Act has been a handbrake on the New Zealand economy. It has created cost and complexity, headaches and confusion. It has stifled growth and competition. And the changes Minister Bishop announced today will release that handbrake. To improve living standards, create jobs and lift incomes, New Zealand needs to stop saying no and start saying yes. Yes to investment, yes to innovation and yes to growth. And that's what these changes are all about, making it easier, faster and cheaper, whether you're building a deck or a wind farm.
How will these changes improve economic performance?
Well, Mr Speaker, the changes the government has announced today will improve economic performance in 3 main ways. First, they will lower the costs at each step of the planning system, in fact, reducing dramatically the number of circumstances in which a consent will even be required. This will put a stop to the gravy train of consultants and lawyers that has characterised the RMA. They will help ensure that New Zealand's scarce resources are being used in the most valuable way they can, and they will establish a more flexible and enabling system that promotes innovation, investment, adaptation. Together with other reforms from this government, these changes will help lift New Zealand's productivity, reduce regulatory burdens and get the economy growing.
Supplementary. What effect will these changes have on costs?
Well, Mr Speaker, the changes announced today will generate administrative and compliance savings for all participants in the resource management system, users of the system, of course, but also local and central government. From the mum and dad wanting to renovate their home, through to the farmer wanting to grow vegetables for our plates. Fewer activities will require consents in future, and I'm advised that close to half of consent applications may become unnecessary. There will be fewer hearings, fewer appeals, fewer delays. And economic consultants Castalia have calculated that the net administrative and compliance benefits in present value terms will amount to $13 billion over the next 30 years.
Supplementary. What wider effects will these changes have?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, cost savings are just one part of a bigger story. Most importantly, projects that under the current system would be delayed, deferred or not happen at all, despite those with capital eager to get started and make things happen, will in future go ahead in a timely way. There are huge benefits, for example, from making housing supply more responsive to demand. Instead of tying up in court proposals for new homes for New Zealanders, the new law will make it faster for them to get built. And there are huge benefits from infrastructure projects in low-risk locations proceeding at a greater pace and scale than they are now, not tied up in the current multi-year delays which have plagued so many government transport projects. And the complexity and uncertainty of the current resource management rules is costing New Zealand in terms of growth, incomes and opportunities. The changes Minister Bishop announced today will get things moving again.
Yeah. Question number 9, the Honourable Ginny Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Social Development and Employment and reads, does she stand by her statement, quote, our government does not accept that a life on welfare is as good as it gets for our young people, end quote. If so, why?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Louise Hobson.
Yes, and we know that people under the age of 25 on the job seeker benefit are estimated to spend another 2 decades on a benefit over their lifetimes. Our government has far greater hopes and aspirations for young Kiwis than a life on welfare, and we make no apologies for encouraging them into education, further training or employment. That's why we are delivering more early intervention, clearer expectations and stronger partnerships with employers to help more people move from welfare into work. We've seen over 26,000 young people leave welfare for work in the last 12 months. The steps we are taking will put New Zealand and young New Zealanders on a better path.
Why did she launch her community coaching pilot at Youth Inspire in the Hutt Valley, which helps young people into work, and then subsequently cut their funding?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said in the annual review last week to that member, MSD runs their procurement basis, as most government agencies do, on the All of Government procurement guidelines. And when they go out to tender for services and for products, they want to make sure that what they are purchasing delivers government outcomes and also provides value for money.
What are the other programs that have been funded by MSD in the Hutt Valley to specifically support young people into employment?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I would say is the provider that is going to be providing the youth job coaching in the Hutt Valley will be announced in coming weeks. And as I said to that member, we have great providers all over New Zealand who are doing fantastic work with young people. That's why we've got 26,000 young people in the last year alone have exited from welfare into work.
Does she agree with Chris Bishop, who said that, quote, Youth Inspire do a great job in our community? If so, why did they have their funding cut when they are the only provider in the area that support young people into employment?
Well, the member's completely wrong. There are other services in the Hutt Valley that deliver services to young people, whether it's driver licensing, the youth coaching is up for renegotiation. And what that member fails to realise is Youth Aspire will continue to have contracts available through MSD.
What message does it send to young people when she cuts the only program in the Hutt that gives them, young people, the skills and confidence to get a job, and even the local National MP is at a loss as to why their funding has been cut?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member is just blatantly wrong. There are other service providers in the Hutt. MSD has run a program,
Name them.
and the program provider that will be replacing the youth coaching will be announced in the coming week. So no, I'm not going to do MSD's job in announcing who they have procured the services from. They are absolutely, because when a procurement is reissued, it is based on the services that MSD is buying. They are buying job coaching for young people. I'm really proud of the work MSD do all over New Zealand. I accept that for individual providers it's challenging when they have a change to their contract, and I'm really excited about that they will continue to provide Hei Potama Rangatahi services. I'd be surprised if that member isn't pleased that they'll continue to do that.
Mr. Speaker.
Question number 10, Ryan Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Local Government and asks, what recent announcements has he made on capping council rates?
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For too long, Kiwis have seen unsustainable double-digit rate rises at a time when they can least afford it. Last week, we said enough is enough and announced that we will cap increases to council rates at a time when the central government, businesses and households are tightening their belts. Councils need to do the same.
That's right. Yeah, very good. Mr. Speaker, how will the proposed rates cap work?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've adopted a target band approach, similar to the way the Reserve Bank approaches inflation. This will mean that rates increases can only be between 2% and 4% per year. These numbers are linked to the midpoint of the inflation target and long-run GDP growth. The upper band ensures that rate increases remain affordable and sustainable, while the lower band ensures councils keep up with investment.
That's right. Can councils exceed the target band?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge that unique circumstances may arise in which rates may need to exceed 4%, such as natural disasters. The rates target model allows councils to apply for a temporary deviation from the target band. But let me be clear, deviation will be the exception, not the rule.
What comments has he seen on the government's proposed rates cap?
Well, Mr. Speaker, you might imagine that this has been very much welcomed by ratepayers who have been hit hard by rates increases. I'm also pleased to see that even some councillors and mayors welcome this announcement. Thames Coromandel Mayor Peter Revel welcomed the announcement, saying, quote, "The move to a target range gives council a clear and workable framework." Christchurch City Councillor Sam McDonald said, quote, "This is a significant step forward in reining in the cost of living crisis. Our council is up for the challenge and we are already got a program in place and underway." Mr. Speaker, a rates cap is a pragmatic policy and I encourage the whole House to get behind it.
Well done. Question number 11, the Honourable Marama Davidson.
Ki te Premier, e tautoko ana ia I ngā kōrero me ngā mahi katoa a tōna kāwanatanga.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes.
Will it be communities and the environment who benefit from his government's pushing through of the Fast Track Approvals Amendment Bill? Or will this solely benefit the corporations seeking to undermine communities and the environment to rush through their projects?
In answer to the first leg of the question, both.
Why is his government further expanding unchecked ministerial power over large-scale projects when the original Fast Track Bill was criticised widely for concentrating power in the hands of ministers without meaningful public or environmental oversight?
I disagree completely. We're very proud of the fast track legislation and the implications that it's now having. We'll be probably about 9 projects that'll be approved before Christmas. I just take the example of the Auckland ports, who needed to build 2 wharfs. It would have taken 5 years under the old RMA, but thanks to the work of Minister Bishop and Minister Jones implementing fast track, it was done in 55 days, and on the 56th day, they started digging.
What is his response then to the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, who said that the Fast Track Bill is a, quote, thinly veiled attempt to guarantee a favourable decision, executive overreach for which no case has been made, end quote, and that there are, quote, no guardrails.
Oh, I disagree completely. What is exciting about Fast Track is that we are going to get things done and built in this country, and we have been tied up in red tape, green tape, just a bunch of bureaucrats, and we need to unblock the joint and get the show on the road and get it moving.
What does he think it says then about his government when the most controversial amendments in the Fast Track Approvals Bill were only supported by corporations who are current and past applicants, with the other 95% of submitters opposing?
Well, it's actually New Zealanders that are winning because of Fast Track and because of our RMA reforms, because it means that they'll get renewable energy faster, it means they'll get homes faster, farmers will be able to get on with farming and growing, we'll be able to get hospitals, schools and roads built much quicker. That's great stuff.
Is the Prime Minister simply of the opinion that the government knows best and that communities, the environment and Papua and iwi all deserve less of a say on fast-track projects than the corporates submitting applications?
No, I listen to the voice of everyday New Zealanders who say it's just too hard to get things done and built in this country. They can't understand why it costs 50% more to build a 3-bedroom house here in New Zealand than it does in Australia, because of our RMA, because of our slow track, because we've been we've clogged the joint up with red tape and green tape. We're getting rid of it, we're prioritising economic growth, and we're going to grow.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Tama Pūtaka.
Can the Prime Minister please confirm that there are at least 2 Māori-led fast-track projects that have been approved, one at the top of the south called Maitahi and one at West Auckland called Rangitōpuni?
Yes, I can, and I can also confirm that iwi businesses and organisations are beneficiaries of Fast Track and our new RMA reforms as well. All treaty settlements will be upheld, but they will also be able to use their land as they see fit, exercise their property rights, and to get things done and built.
Question number 12. Ruben Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Media and Communications. Does he stand by his commitment on the 2nd of July 2024 that, quote, the government is taking immediate action to support New Zealand's media and content production sectors, end quote? And if so, what immediate action has the government taken to date?
Well, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Paul David.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question. Yes, I stand by that statement. And the immediate focus back then was the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill. And of course, as is highly obvious to everybody, circumstances changed somewhat at the end of 2004 with the US presidency changes, and a more cautious approach was adopted. But since then, we've made excellent progress on a whole host of other areas, such as finally passing legislation to remove outdated advertising restrictions on Sundays. And I do want to thank the member and their party for their bipartisan support for that, notwithstanding some snide comments made during the debate. We also made changes to the screen production rebate to help Shortland Street continue on its way. And in a period of intense fiscal challenges, we continued our funding for New Zealand on air and the screen rebates alongside Minister Wilson. So, and there is much more that I could go into.
Supplementary.
Wait for your colleagues to give you, the whole House to give you the perspective.
Thank you, Mr.
Silence
Speaker.
while you're asking a question.
Does he stand by his statement that, quote, firstly, the government will progress the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill with amendments to support our local media companies to earn revenue for the news they produce, end quote? And if so, given that other countries have taken steps in that direction, why has the legislation still not had its second reading more than a year later?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's important for politicians to be light on their feet, and that member, of course, did hear the answer to that question in the previous answer, and I've given him the answer, and I think it makes perfect sense. And so I'd encourage him to try and be a bit more light-footed next time.
No, hang on. Wait on. That's not an acceptable thing. You can't determine what he knows. So if he wants to ask the same question over and over, he can. You should answer it over and over as well. Reuben Davison asked the question again.
The same question again?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If you can't remember it, just move on.
Luckily, I have it written down. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he still stand by his statement that, and I repeat, quote, firstly, the government will progress the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill with amendments to support our local media companies to earn revenue for the news they produce, end quote. And if so, given other countries have taken steps since, why has the legislation still not had a second reading more than a year later?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said in my answer to the primary question, that events have changed since I made those statements. And to paraphrase John Maynard Keynes, when the circumstances change, I change. And what else would he do?
Supplementary. How many New Zealand jobs could be protected if the government did what they promised to did what they promised to do more than a year ago and passed acts like the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill?
Well, it's impossible to calculate.
Supplementary. Does he share the concerns of his National Party colleague Greg Fleming regarding the impact of a 25% reduction in funding to Māori media? And if so, has he raised these concerns with the Minister for Māori Development?
Well, we all know that Mr. Fleming has a wide range of concerns and he passes them on to us regularly, and we're very supportive of those concerns. What I would say, of course, is that the most important thing we can do for the media is to get the economy growing again so that advertising revenue grows, and that is what our government is absolutely committed to do. And I'd also make the point that there's been a lot of work that's been done in this area, and I encourage Labor to continue on in the spirit of bipartisanship which they showed on the Sundays and public holidays, and there's much more that we can do together.
Supplementary. How can the media and content production sector have any confidence in him when his party didn't even turn up to vote on the only legislation he has introduced to support the sector since he became the minister, and now even his own MPs are second-guessing his government's cuts?
Well, I'm not quite sure what the circumstances the member is referring to, other than to say that notwithstanding all the fiscal pressures we've funded, we continue to fund New Zealand On Air, we continue to fund the screen rebates, and Mr. Speaker, we've also put some extra resources into the local democracy and the Open Justice Initiative, which have been great initiatives, and I'm sure will be welcomed right across the sector, and I'd leave it at that. Oh, by the way, no, I won't leave it at that. One thing that we haven't done is waste $20 million on a failed RNZ and TVNZ merger. And I think everybody in the media sector will be happy with that.
Thank you. That concludes oral questions. We'll take 30 seconds for those who have other items of business to go to leave the House quietly without conversations on the way. I call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Infrastructure Funding and Financing Amendment Bill, first reading.
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
I present a legislative statement on the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Amendment Bill.
The legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website. The Honourable Chris Bishop.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Amendment Bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Finance and Expenditure Committee to consider the bill. Mr. Speaker, over the last 3 decades, house prices in New Zealand have increased more than any other OECD country. According to the OECD's Better Life Index, we ranked 40th out of 41 countries for housing affordability, just in front of the Slovak Republic. Our housing crisis has held us back economically and socially. As I've said many times, the government's determined to get on top of this problem by focusing on the fundamentals, treating housing as a complex and dynamic system. There are 3 pillars to our housing growth program. Pillar 1 is about freeing up land for development and removing planning barriers. Pillar 2 is about improving infrastructure funding and financing to support growth. Pillar 3 is about incentives to support growth. Pillar 1 includes housing growth targets, requiring them to enable 30 years of development capacity, enabling intensification and a greater mix of uses in the right places, and making greenfield growth easier. Mr Speaker, members who have read or at least glanced so far at the planning bill that introduced to Parliament today, which will have its first reading next week, will notice that one of the aims or goals of the new system is competitive urban land markets, and that is an extremely important objective and goal for the system, and that is reflected in the bill we are reading for a first time today as well. Mr Speaker, Pillar 2 of the government's reforms relate to infrastructure funding and financing, and this is very important because you can have as much land supply and abundant development opportunities as you like, whether or not that's achieved through housing growth targets or more responsive land supply and land release mechanism in cities, which we're also proposing. But without the infrastructure and without the nimble infrastructure funding tools, the capacity will not be realised into ultimately houses. Pillar 2, Mr Speaker, is underway as well. We're publicly consulting on an exposure draft of the Local Government Infrastructure Funding Amendment Bill. This is to replace development contributions with a development levy system. The public consultation runs until February next year. The government intends to introduce legislation in mid-next year. The reality is, Mr Speaker, that under the status quo, councils and developers face significant challenges to fund and finance enabling infrastructure for housing. The government's aim is to move to a future state where funding and financing tools enable a responsive supply of infrastructure where it's commercially viable to build new houses. The aim is to shift market expectations of future scarcity, bring down the cost of land for new housing and improve incentives to develop land sooner rather than land banking. Brings us to the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act, which was established in 2020 by the previous government, picking up on work developed by the John Key and Bill English-led government in 2016 and 17. It's an alternative means to fund and finance infrastructure for urban growth. It involves the establishment of a special purpose vehicle to finance the infrastructure needed to enable development, repaid by levying the properties which benefit off council balance sheets. I think it would be fair to say, Mr Speaker, that the Act has fallen short of delivering infrastructure needed to respond to growth. Only 2 IFF Act levies have been established since 2020. This was a piece of legislation developed in a relatively bipartisan fashion, actually, as I say. Started life in the last national government, passed by Honourable Phil Twyford and friends in 2020. Has not quite worked out the way that people intended it to work out. So this amendment legislation makes some, I think, sensible amendments to allow it to be used more frequently in a cheaper way and in a way with less red tape. So the bill aims to remove unnecessary barriers to using the Act, improve the viability of it, to make the levy development and approvals process simpler and more streamlined. The improvements to infrastructure funding and financing reflects the government's overarching approach of growth paying for growth to enable more flexible provision of infrastructure that responds to development. As I said earlier, what we're trying to do is move to a system where there are abundant development opportunities and the funding and finance required to support those development opportunities is allowed to turn up and is not artificially constrained by artificial constraints on funding and financing in the same way that there are artificial constraints on land supply, which is what we have at the moment. And our future state will move to a world in which the economics of development dictate where and how it happens and when it happens, rather than artificial planning rules which have held our cities back for too long and are the root cause of the housing crisis that has bedevilled New Zealand for too long, with all of the moral, fiscal, social implications that come from that. Fixing our housing crisis is going to take a long time. It is not something that can be done overnight. It is a complex system, but we are making good progress, picking up on some of the good work done under the previous government. So in terms of streamlining the levy approvals process, the extensive process required for applicants to have a IFF levy approved can be a barrier when trying to use the Act. So we are now simplifying requirements for levy proposals and recommendation reports, simplifying the mandatory considerations the Minister of Housing must take into account when assessing a levy, improving certainty for developer-led proposals by limiting Council's ability to withhold the necessary endorsements where statutory requirements have been met, removing the requirement to assess a levy's affordability for these proposals supported by developers and all other existing landowners. For new developments, levy payers self-assess affordability and opt into the levy when deciding to purchase a property. As such, ministerial consideration of whether a levy is affordable is not needed if existing landowners are supportive. These things will make a difference, and I'm looking forward to seeing the feedback through the Select Committee to see whether or not we've got it exactly right. This bill will go to a Select Committee, and I've nominated the Finance Committee because I think that's the appropriate committee for it. The bill broadens the scope of the Act to improve its flexibility and viability for a range of infrastructure projects. This is really important. This will better reflect developer-led use of the tool and enable the Act to be used for transport projects delivered by the New Zealand Transport Agency or KiwiRail as part of a funding stack for transport infrastructure investment where it benefits property owners. Broadening the scope of the Act beyond simply addressing local authority funding and financing constraints aligns with wider transport system changes signalled in the government policy statement on land transport to require NZTA to consider alternative funding and financing arrangements for all new infrastructure projects to ensure that New Zealand delivers more infrastructure sooner. The simple proposition is this: if there is public expenditure on infrastructure projects that private landowners benefit from, and they are the beneficiaries of that expenditure, they should help to cover the costs of that expenditure. It's a form of value capture, some would call it that. We prefer the term cost recovery. It doesn't actually matter what you call it. The proposition, or at least the value proposition, is a simple one. There's a lot of complexity to actually implementing it, but the changes we're making through the IFF Act amendment will allow that to happen. It will also enable the Act to be used for water infrastructure investments delivered by new water organisations delivered through the Local Water Done Well policy. The bill replaces the definition of community infrastructure, so it's not required to be owned or controlled by a territorial authority. This broadens the potential use of the Act to include community infrastructure that is owned or controlled by a third party rather than vested in a territorial authority, and the bill will enable levy deferrals to help manage any affordability concerns and better support the use of the Act for the purposes of value capture or cost recovery. There's a variety of other changes to improve the Act, including clarifying a special purpose vehicle may commence recovery action if levies remain unpaid for more than 4 months, and amending the Local Government Rating Act to ensure that rates and levies rank equally in the event of a rating sale. Mr Speaker, this is an important series of changes, but it can't be divorced from the context of the flexible funding system we're trying to create for local infrastructure. This is one tool in the toolkit. It will be used, I think, for large new greenfield subdivisions on city fringes, where the economics of that development makes sense. And I've already had some people say to me, well, I've had a look at the IFF, it doesn't work, it's too expensive. Well, that's okay. That's actually okay, because if the cost of the infrastructure and the special purpose vehicle doesn't make it economic to develop, well, maybe we shouldn't be developing it. Actually, letting price signals suffuse themselves into land markets is actually part of the problem. Too often we've been cross-subsidising development in areas that don't make sense and not allowing those price signals to work effectively. So we may see it for greenfield subdivisions where people can make a buck out of it and the economics stack up, and we will also potentially use it for large new state highway projects in the future, or also, just in my last 25 seconds, the next time we do a City Rail Link project and we build a brand new $6 billion train station next to a casino, we should ask them to help cover the costs of the massive new infrastructure we've put into their private company. And we'll be able to do this with the changes. We'll be able to do this with the changes. Well, you don't need a wealth tax, you just need sensible infrastructure funding tools. And I look forward to your support.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call on the Honourable Kieran McAnulty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We've heard from the infrastructure and the local government sector a very clear message that they want some certainty. They want to see an end to the stop-start carry-on that they have seen over the last couple of years. And today is a particularly important day to point that out because it is relevant to this bill. We're hearing a lot today around how much the government's proposed changes to the Resource Management Act will make things better, but no mention of the fact that it was this government that put us back to the old RMA that was no longer fit for purpose. Now, I'm pleased that the government is not following the approach where there was a reform, they scrapped the reform, went back to the old approach, then used that as justification for the fast track, then bypassed proper parliamentary procedure and public feedback to pass that bill. At least they haven't scrapped the original Infrastructure Funding and Finance Act and started again. That is a positive. And it gives us an opportunity as a Labor Party to be able to indicate that we will support this bill to Select Committee because it does build on what was intended by the 2020 Act. And it is true that only 2 levies have gone through the process as a result of that. And it is quite clear that there are some barriers to establishing those. We would like to see more occur. Because at the end of the day, many councils are at their debt ceiling. Even with the changing of that ceiling by this government, they will be under significant financial strain. That is particularly true with this bungled water reform by this government and the additional requirements that they have placed on council and the government's inability or unwillingness to consider alternative revenue streams for councils outside rates. And let's not fall into the trap of thinking that a rates cap is going to be the silver bullet here. It's in many cases going to make things more difficult. And in fact, this is potentially the only way in which that some areas will be able to go through some infrastructure projects because, frankly, councils' hands will be tied behind their back. But what is of concern, Mr Speaker, is the lack of consultation that was delivered as part of the development of this bill. Now, it's been a couple of years and, frankly, the changes that are in this bill have been signalled by ministers for some time. So it is quite telling that if you look through the departmental reports and the regulatory impact statements, it's quite clear that departments did not have enough time, they say so themselves, to assess this and actually understand whether the changes that are being proposed here will actually deliver what the ministers just outlined. It's very difficult as a parliament for us to assess a piece of legislation when departments haven't been given enough time to actually look at what is being proposed and give Parliament a steer as to whether it's going to work. It's quite telling that they only consulted with a hand-picked select few of councils, not councils across the board and not local government New Zealand. They could argue that they only talk to those councils that are at their debt ceiling already. But as we know, many, many more are predicted to fall into that situation, and they will indeed be interested in the provisions that are proposed in this bill. It is also interesting and worth noting that the government hasn't consulted with iwi on this bill, despite the fact, even though the minister's speech didn't touch on this bill actually proposes quite significant changes to how Māori land is viewed and considered as part of this process. Now, I am pleased that it is going to Select Committee because we will work constructively with the government to look to improve this bill, but we will have questions around that. The expansion of this to include transport is worthy of pretty detailed assessment. We want some assurances that the changes that are being proposed around Māori land in particular do not disadvantage those shareholders in that land given their unique status, unlike any other shareholders of land holdings in this country, and of course the responsibilities of the Crown through Te Tiratia Waitangi. It is essential that we get those reassurances. And I'm not sure enough consideration has been given to changing the requirement for a levy to be linked to a specific project. We're keen to dive into those at Select Committee. So we're happy to support it to there, Mr Speaker, but we're keen to look into it more.
The Honourable Julianne Chen.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Tēnā koutou e te whare. The Minister in his speech referred to enabling more greenfields development. And I think I have to fundamentally disagree with his assertion that that is necessary or desirable for Aotearoa New Zealand. We have known now for decades, there has been study after study that has quantified the infrastructure costs associated with greenfields development significantly higher. The places we need homes and businesses and schools and everything else now is within the existing urban area, close to good quality public transport in walkable neighbourhoods. That is what we'll deliver for Aotearoa New Zealand. And the people opposite are actually just a bunch of walking contradictions, Mr. Speaker, if I could. Like, everything they say, the government, is a walking contradiction, because they say that they want things to be value for money and they want taxes to be low, and at the same time they have a wish list of outrageously expensive highway projects which are not actually going to improve productivity at all, but would probably facilitate a lot of suburban sprawl. So, like, the one kind of coherent thread that links what the government is doing is that they're doing what land bankers want. And it's those people who own farmland that is somewhere out near Auckland who are going to benefit from the government investing in highways because they'll be able to sell off that land as houses. Will New Zealanders benefit from that? Well, no, those neighbourhoods will be neighbourhoods where people do not have good, affordable access to the amenities that they need to live good lives. Overall, our country will be spending more on fuel and private vehicles. We'll have higher emissions, more air pollution, more sedentary lifestyles. All of that is cost. And it actually doesn't make people happy. And it doesn't benefit the economy, but it does benefit some vested interests. And that's why you can guarantee that the coalition government will be doing something, is to help those vested interests make more and more money at the expense of public good and our taio, our environment, and our climate. So when it comes to infrastructure funding and financing, like, the whole thing is a very complex new structure that tries to get around the fact that if we want to have more infrastructure, we have to pay for it. And as much as they say, well, we'll internalize the costs of that infrastructure, when does that ever happen? It's not happening. And if it did, if people actually had to pay the cost of the infrastructure, it would be hugely unaffordable, and they would choose not to develop there. They would choose not to live in those places. That's the truth. It's quite simple. Now, if, we're going to support this bill to select committee, and we did support when the previous government did it, but ultimately what they're trying to get at is the idea that public infrastructure needs to be paid for by a group of people who benefit from it, which is actually the public, and that's what taxation is meant to do. And if you are using more direct pricing mechanisms, and if we were doing that, we certainly wouldn't be prioritizing the highways they're prioritizing. We wouldn't be prioritizing greenfield growth, because we have quantified the costs and it is unaffordable. What we need government to be focusing on is removing the barriers to building density done well in our existing urban areas, investing in high quality, fast, frequent, affordable, free public transport, in rail and electric bus services, linking up our communities across the motu as we once had. And that would all make sense. And when you go to other countries, and I appreciate that many people here won't know what the rest of the world is doing, but if you go to other countries that we aspire to be like, they have much higher use, much higher investment in public transport, in walkable, cyclable neighborhoods. They do have more community-driven development of mixed-use neighborhoods, which here, it's like, in New Zealand, it's like, let the landowner dictate how the city develops, which is crazy. It just doesn't deliver what people need to live good lives. People need to be walking distance from schools, walking distance from public transport shops, and the big lie is they claim that this is all about choice.
That's enough.
Rubbish. It is not about choice.
A point of order, Simon Court.
I don't mean to interrupt the member, because she is quite economically coherent on most matters, but she's just referred to members of the governing parties as liars. I object to that. It's unparliamentary. It's going to bring the House into disorder.
Speaking to the point of order.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that members might be feeling sensitive, but I said the big lie, not accusing someone of being a liar at all. The big lie is a more general thing about the idea that cars give independence and freedom.
Yeah,
It's an expression.
I think it's a debating point. You've got 22 seconds left.
So people have not chosen this. This is something that benefits an overseas industry that sells motor vehicles and fossil fuels to us at high cost, that actually drains our country's productivity, makes our air dirtier, our water dirtier. It's the source of all the microplastics in the oceans, and it costs us a whole lot of money. And the Greens have a better solution.
Simon Court.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's first reading of the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Amendment Bill is about fixing one of the biggest handbrakes on New Zealand's growth: how hard it is to get infrastructure built when and where communities need it. The original Act came out of a rare moment of genuine innovation. A developer found a practical way to deliver the infrastructure for the Milldale development without being trapped by council debt limits or funding constraints. It should have set the standard for how we fund future growth. Instead, the Act has barely been used. It's been weighed down by process, bureaucracy, too many chances for delay or obstruction by those who don't carry the cost of saying no. This bill removes those barriers so more projects can get off the ground. It expands who can use the Act, improves viability of a wider range of infrastructure, and simplifies the levy and approval process so the tool becomes practical instead of theoretical. The bill widens access to the Act, extending it to new water organisations like Local Water Done Well, and to transport projects covered by NZTA and KiwiRail. New Zealand has a massive backlog of infrastructure needed to support growth. If the people who benefit can pay through a levy, these projects can move sooner rather than waiting for councils' balance sheets to catch up. The bill also makes sure developer-led proposals get a fair run. When developers meet statutory requirements, councils will be required to endorse them, instead of finding new ways to stall those projects. That certainty has been missing for far too long. We also introduced levy deferrals, giving flexibility where affordability concerns arise, and better supporting use of the Act for cost recovery purposes. The current levy process is so complex it puts people off before they begin. This bill fixes that by enabling levy orders to be made directly on the terms of the levy proposal itself, removing duplication and simplifying the process for developing a recommendation report, simplifying mandatory considerations of the Minister of Housing, cutting paperwork and the evidence burden placed on applicants, removing the ministerial affordability assessment, where developers and all existing landowners agree to the proposal. Removing the need for an infrastructure endorsement, where the infrastructure will not vest in a responsible authority, making the Act far more workable for developer-led and owned assets. These remove real-world costs, time delays, and the friction that currently kill the momentum that will actually get more homes delivered sooner. The bill also provides several targeted fixes to the Act to make it usable on the ground. These include providing special purpose vehicles clear authority to begin recovery action if levies remain unpaid for more than 4 months, allowing infrastructure to be completed for up to 2 years before a levy proposal is submitted, because sometimes developers work much faster than the system they're forced to work within. This will ensuring councils can recover reasonable administrative costs when providing endorsements on these proposals, refining the definition of protected Māori land so that relevant land can be identified from publicly available information rather than forcing proposers to spend potentially months and a whole lot of money to identify records that are almost impossible to find. The new changes will prevent double dipping by ensuring levies and development contributions cannot fund the same infrastructure more than once. expanding how leviable land categories may be defined, including developed or undeveloped status, floor area, or categorising land at a fixed point in time. Together with minor and technical improvements, these changes finally make the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act a practical tool. They give developers, councils and central government clearer rules, better incentives and far fewer avenues for delay. Combined with the government's Going for Housing Growth program, this bill helps build a system that actually supports flexible, demand-led growth instead of resisting it at every turn. Mr. Speaker, this bill cuts through obstacles and enables people who want to build to actually get on with building. That's how we fix what matters for New Zealanders. More homes, more infrastructure where we need it, delivered without the bureaucratic drag that has kept this country back. I commend this bill to the House.
Andy Foster.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is one of many initiatives being made by this government to make it easier, cheaper, faster and more certain to get things built and delivered in New Zealand. And Mr. Speaker, we have to raise our productivity. That is what ultimately this is all about. If we're going to have a higher quality of living, a higher standard of living, if we're going to be able to deliver the public services that we want to deliver, we have to raise our productivity. It doesn't grow on trees. We can't borrow that living standard. We can't borrow those services as some in the opposition benches seem to want us to do. Mr. Speaker, New Zealanders have been trying to deliver that higher productivity with a ball and chain wrapped around our collective ankles. This bill is part of reducing that barrier. It means we're talking about today, we'll be talking about making consenting easier. We're also talking here about making the financing and funding and delivering of infrastructure easier and cheaper. Industry and business know this. This government knows this. Not quite sure if all of the opposition know it, but they keep on complaining, Mr. Speaker, about workers going to, particularly in the construction industry, leaving for Australia. And one of the things they don't seem to realise is that every time we remove, in this government, we remove a barrier that helps more construction happen, that is helping to keep those people here in New Zealand. And Mr. Speaker, actually it was a real delight to be on the West Coast recently to visit a number of mines and to see that there were a number of the people working in those mines who have come from Australia to work in New Zealand because we are providing employment opportunities in New Zealand, in this case on the West Coast, which I know is a place very familiar to you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill is about helping to provide funding through making the IFF process easier and less bureaucratic, as we've already heard. But at the moment, it's only been used in 2 places in New Zealand, and that obviously shows the barrier that there is there. 2 final things to say. First is a note of caution. The Bill's general policy statement says that the IFF Act was introduced to help deliver infrastructure projects free from local authority funding and financing constraints. Well, I note that we are also, as a government, trying to make sure that we keep a lid on rates rises. What we don't want to do is to see IFF being used as a way around rates rises and the limitations that there are on council raising money, because there's a limitation on how much money they can take from their ratepayers, which we want to make sure there is a limitation. And the second one is that as the Minister introduced this, he talked about growth paying for growth, and that's a really, really important concept. When we had the Infrastructure Commission in front of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee during Scrutiny Week, they told us, in answer to questions, that growth at the moment is paying for something between 30 and 50% of the costs of growth. That means growth is nowhere near paying for growth. And that means that the costs of that growth at the moment are landing on existing ratepayers, consumers, taxpayers, and that's something that needs to change. And actually, I was surprised by the comments made by Julianne Genter in this debate, talking about greenfields development, and then somehow it's a bad thing that that happens, and saying that somehow linking it with the Transport Agency and KiwiRail. But what this specifically does, it allows the possibility that the likes of New Zealand Transport Agency, the likes of KiwiRail, can say, look, we've built some infrastructure which allows some development to happen, and we are going to charge the beneficiaries of that development for some of that cost. That is growth paying for growth. That's been a hole in the system for a very, very long time. It's a great thing that we moved to fix that, and Mr. Speaker, I look forward to this bill progressing, and I commend it to the House.
Catherine Wedd.
Look, it's time for us to get things built in this country. Say yes to housing, yes to infrastructure, yes to renewable energy, and this bill is about providing the financing tools to do that. I commend it to the House.
The Honourable Barbara Edmonds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to take a call on the first reading of the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Amendment Bill. Earlier this morning, Mr Speaker, I had the privilege and the pleasure to attend the opening of 18 new homes which will be owned by Pacific people in Porirua East. And what was really important about that project is that it was a project that spanned different governments. In Budget 2022, $49 million was set aside for that particular project, with a commitment to $115 million over 10 years to build up to 300 new homes in Porirua East. What also accompanied it was a $132 million investment in the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, which cleaned up, basically fixed the pipes in Porirua East so that we didn't have sewage going into the Porirua Harbour whenever there were heavy rains. Effectively, if we hadn't fixed that pipe, about up to 7 swimming pools of sewage could flow into the Porirua Harbour. And thankfully, through the work at the time, the Labour government, I was the local MP, our local iwi Ngāti Toa Rangatira, the Porirua City Council and the Central Pacific Collective, they managed to now be in the process of actually building homes, built the homes, and tomorrow 18 new homeowners will actually be able to turn the key into their properties. And what's important about that is it shows an element of bipartisanship, because yes, the funding was done in 2022, the works had started in relation to that particular project, but what was really good, and I acknowledged Minister Dr. Shane Reti today, who attended that particular opening, I acknowledged them for not cancelling the project. And that was a really important point, to both acknowledge that they didn't cancel it, but also that it's actually continuing. And I think acknowledgements are due where they are due. And so I do want to acknowledge Minister Bishop as well. In his first reading speech, he spoke about how this particular piece of work, which ended up being the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act 2020, had started under the previous government, was continued by the Labour government, came into an act, and that the minister is bringing forward improvements to this particular bill. And so we do welcome improvements to this particular act to ensure that there is sufficient flexibility to be able to allow for infrastructure funding and financing. So I want to acknowledge the minister for those particular comments, but also acknowledge our infrastructure spokesperson, Kieran McAnulty. He spoke about the number of times that we have been approached by the infrastructure sector. I was an infrastructure spokesperson before Kieran McAnulty, Honourable Kieran McAnulty, and I have lost count of the number of sector leaders, organisations, construction firms, engineering firms who approached me during that period, and still to this day, about pleading for bipartisan approach when it comes to infrastructure. Infrastructure projects don't just get spades in the ground on day one. A lot of planning, a lot of processes need to happen, because we would not have been able to build 300 homes had we not fixed the pipes underneath the ground. That's just a matter of form, particularly for a city like Porirua City, which was built for 6,000 and now has over close to 70,000 people who live there. So it's so important for infrastructure for the sector to have some certainty. So Labour is happy to support this bill through the first reading, so that we can hear some submissions in relation to during the Select Committee phase. And we again want to acknowledge the Minister for allowing the Select Committee phase to happen to such an important bill. I do want to echo the concerns by Kieran McAnulty around the consultation for this. It's now by the pass, but however, my disappointment really is that the regulatory impact statement was finalised in November 2024. That's like a year ago. A year ago, officials and ministers could have kept consulting to finalise that regulatory impact statement, given that it's taken a year to get this bill to the House, to the point, well, We're basically hitting up a wall to Christmas. We've got obviously something big is happening next year with an election, but hopefully through the Select Committee process, I do encourage the community to submit on this and the particular sector. My last concern, which I would just want to put on the record for officials, is just around eligible infrastructure, around community infrastructure. They're broadening the definition of that. Looking forward to seeing their advice when it comes to the Finance Expenditure Select Committee, and I commend this bill to the House.
Grant McCullum. Speaker. Well, this government is about getting things done, and it's about getting growth to fund growth, and getting things done now. The communities like Kirikiri are sick and tired of paying too much for land because it's taking too long to get things approved, and it's taking too long to get funding because councils are saying no. And I commend this bill to the House.
Tangi Utikiri.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. I rise to take a call on the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Amendment Bill. And as my colleagues have already indicated today, the Labour Party will be supporting this bill through to Select Committee. Sir, it's been already mentioned that the previous government brought this bill into being, and the focus there is on looking at alternative means to support growth in high growth areas. Now, infrastructure is always a challenging issue for, I think, any council around the world. And around the country, in New Zealand as well. I want to acknowledge the comments that my colleague, the Honourable Barbara Edmonds, had just concluded in making acknowledgements where they're due. That is important, but I also think it's important to indicate criticism where criticism is due. And while this is a bill that seeks to try and speed up or free up the ability to fund some key pieces of infrastructure, we also know that in some communities, in many communities, there are pieces of infrastructure that effectively have been put on hold because the government had put a bit of a stop to things. So that is certainly something that we want to avoid, and that is part of, I guess, the approach in the Labour Party supporting this bill through to Select Committee. Mr Speaker, the Minister himself talked about the applicability or relativity of transport projects being brought into the fold around that. There's no doubt in my mind that there are, for the future, a number of transport projects and transport pieces of infrastructure that are proposed. We do have a little bit of a concern around the full extent to which this would apply to transport projects, what specific projects. And so that's not going to hold us back from supporting this to Select Committee, but it does send a message to the government that we will be interested at Select Committee in delving into the applicability of specified transport projects and what they might mean. Because there is a real risk, sir, that the costs for these projects could either directly or indirectly be shifted onto households. And as Mr McAnulty indicated, you know, the proposed rates cap from the government, there are still a number of questions to be answered in that particular space. But we do have some concerns around how transport projects will play a role as part of this bill moving forward. Likewise, Mr Speaker, we have some concerns around the local accountability. And again, I guess that's also framed in the local democracy sort of view as well, that how there will be an understanding that some of those local democracy or democratic considerations are applied for any of these pieces of infrastructure when they're considered in situ or in place. I want to make some concluding comments, Mr Speaker, around my concern, I guess, around what appears to be the very limited nature of consultation that has previously been undertaken. And really they're in two areas that I'd like to touch on. The Regulatory Impact Statement as Annex A actually very helpfully identifies a full list of all of those stakeholders that were consulted. And the interesting thing is, I guess, not who's on there, but who's not on there. For example, Local Government New Zealand don't seem to have been consulted. There is a massive role in terms of councils in the local government sector as to where this would play out. I note there are a number of councils listed there. Most of them are from larger metro sort of areas. Maybe that's because of the high growth capacity considerations that they might be placed with at the moment. But nonetheless, it's important to ensure that we have a bit of a wider brief. The other two are in the transport and water reform areas. I know that developers Conservatives and some other stakeholders had been identified here. But given that transportation is seen as a key avenue for which this bill would be applicable, I would have thought that outside of the developers there was an opportunity there to engage from those in that particular sector. And the other is in relation to the proposed changes for Māori land. The Minister has very kindly tabled a legislative statement that outlines some of the changes to that at paragraph 8. It would have been really helpful, I think, in terms of the officials' preparation of the regulatory impact statement, being able to identify the fact that Māori landowners, iwi and others would have been consulted as part of this process. That really does lend itself, in our view, to ensuring that through Select Committee, those are the types of issues that are explored deeply to ensure that some of the concerns that we've identified can be mitigated and perhaps allayed. But for now, we do support this bill through to Select Committee.
Ryan Hamilton.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, it's great to stand and speak to this bill, the IFF, and as we've heard, there's only been 2 that have been implemented, despite it having some bipartisan support. So, Mr. Speaker, these are sensible amendments. They're pragmatic, which will be more enabling. I've got one example on the north end of Hamilton, Te Awa Lakes. They're literally on the bleeding edge of this stuff, and once they get this over the line, then they can unlock 2,500 homes, and by virtue of their development, they can then unlock 25,000 homes. So, Mr. Speaker, I commend it to the House.
Question is the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Infrastructure Funding and Financing Amendment Bill, first reading.
Question is that the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Amendment Bill be considered by the Finance and Expenditure Committee. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Mr Assistant Speaker.
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
I move that urgency be accorded to the introduction and passing through all stages of the Resource Management Duration of Consents Amendment Bill, the first reading and referral to a Select Committee of the Emergency Management Bill No. 2 and the Arms Bill, the remaining stages of the Fast Track Approvals Amendment Bill and the Animal Welfare Regulations for Management of Pigs Amendment Bill, the first reading and referral to a Select Committee of the Crimes Amendment Bill and the Public Works Amendment Bill, the second reading and committee stage of the Electoral Amendment Bill, the passing through all stages of the Climate Change Response 2050 Target and Other Matters Amendment Bill, the remaining stages of the Overseas Investment National Interest Test and Other Matters Amendment Bill, and the recommittal and reconsideration in the Committee of the Whole House of the Judicature Timeliness Legislation Amendment Bill to consider AP 472, and the introduction of the Building Earthquake-Prone Buildings Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, as I think most people know, the government does not like moving urgency, but it is... Well, we don't, but it is a necessary evil in some scenarios, and it is well justified in all of these cases. The Resource Management Duration of Consents Amendment Bill is being introduced and passed today as part of the government's resource management changes to address resource consents that will expire before the enactment of the government's planning replacement regime, which will take effect pending Environment Committee progress mid next year. The Fast Track Approvals Amendment Bill is a government priority, Mr. Speaker, to improve grocery sector competition and to add some finesses to the fast track regime, which is generally working well. There's a range of first readings that the government is keen to send off to Select Committee so they can start their considerations this side of Christmas. The Arms Bill and the Emergency Management Bill, obviously. The Animal Welfare Regulations for the Management of Pigs Bill is having its remaining stages passed before Christmas. There is some time pressure, legally imposed time pressure on that to get that passed. The Public Works Amendment Bill is another bill that we'd like to send to Select Committee this side of Christmas. The Electoral Amendment Bill has been well signalled, and it's important that these changes can be put in place for the next election, which will be at some point in 2026. The Climate Change Response 2050 target is also being passed this week to allow the Minister of Climate Change more time to set an emissions target. The Overseas Investment National Interest Test has again been well signalled, and the government wishes to have its remaining stages passed this week so it can take effect next year or early next year to make sure we can reduce compliance costs while ensuring we facilitate greater foreign investment into New Zealand. The Judicature Timeliness Amendment Bill, well, I think Mr Utikere knows what's wrong with that one. The bill itself is fine. I think it's actually widely supported, but due to a snafu during the I think that's the polite way of putting it. This is a technical term. There's a snafu during the late night voting on the bill. So my understanding is that there was an amendment accepted from the member who's in the chair currently that is not in line with government intention. So the intention is to send the bill back to the committee stage for AP, I think it's 472, so that we can fix up that little error. And of course, we'll get that into law probably next week, I would say. And the Earthquake-Prone Buildings Bill, Mr Speaker, is an important piece of legislation. Again, another first reading. We'd like to get away this side of Christmas. The reality is, Mr Speaker, urgency. The New Zealand Parliament does not sit for very long, and we need these hours in order to advance government business. It's not something we do lightly, and something I try and avoid as much as possible. Well, Ms Brooking, it's a busy government with a busy agenda, and I'll just point out to the member that I was going to say what goes around comes around, but that's too negative. All governments use urgency, Mr Speaker, as the members well know, and I see Sir Geoffrey Palmer was in the media this week saying that this government was an abuser of urgency, which I found slightly rich from the man who was Leader of the House, who put the House into urgency for roughly 20% of the time when he was Leader of the House before the 1987 to 1990 period when he was Deputy Prime Minister, when that government spent around 30% of its time in urgency. But anyway, with those kind of little backhanders at Sir Geoffrey Palmer, I commend the urgency motion to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party vote is called for. Please conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
4 votes opposed.
Takuta Ferris.
Opposed.
Mariamino Kapakingi.
1 vote opposed.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 55. The question is agreed. I understand it's the intention of the government to introduce a bill.
Resource Management Duration of Consents Amendment Bill introduction.
This bill is set down for first reading immediately.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
I present a legislative statement for the Resource Management Duration of Consents Amendment Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website.
I move that the Resource Management Duration of Consents Amendment Bill be now read a first time. Mr Speaker, today the government introduced the Planning Bill and Natural Environment Bill. It's a major milestone in building a modern resource management system, or planning and environmental management system. Those bills are not having their first readings this week. We could have done that, but I think it's worthwhile that those bills, they're around 700 pages, I think, in total, that those bills sit on the order paper and members have a good chance to digest them. They are chunky pieces of work and encourage members to have a read, and no doubt caucuses will wish to consider their positions on those bills. What's that? Oh, you're shaking your head already? Right. Well,
I think there's a legislative statement, isn't it?
No, I'm into my speech. So those bills are going to go to Select Committee, as I say. But until the new system is in place, there is quite a degree of uncertainty, which I think many members will have heard about around the community, around what happens in the interim. So this bill, the Resource Management Duration of Consents Amendment Bill, aims to provide that certainty. So we do want to make sure that businesses and communities can continue to operate smoothly. And at the moment, consent holders face an unnecessary burden. Many of them are required to renew resource consents under the current system, even though the new system will be in place that will streamline processes. And it's our view that that is inefficient and unnecessary. So these are temporary yet urgent changes that will avoid uncertainty, stress and cost. So there's 2 key changes to the bill, and that's actually it. It's a very short bill. In fact, it is. It's a 5-clause mother. It's a 5-clause bill, and so it's a very short bill. So 2 key changes. First, it extends resource consent set to expire before the new system is in place, and it reinstates and extends recently expired consents where a replacement application has already been lodged. So this is where people have that their resource consents have expired, and I forget the exact section of the RMA. What's that? 124. There you go. Thank you, Minister Hoggard. 124, where a replacement application has already been lodged, and it just makes sure that those recently expired consents can be reinstated and extended until December 2027, ensuring they fall within the general transition provisions of the new resource management legislation, which will include longer-term arrangements for all consents and benefit from select committee scrutiny. So the bill imposes minimal costs. Consent holders do not need to take any action. If Parliament agrees to this bill, authorities will simply update the records, notify affected parties, and so the only cost is really just the process of Parliament passing the legislation, which of course I'm keen that Parliament do quickly. We are progressing it under urgency to give immediate certainty and avoid unnecessary expense during the transition. Thousands of consents expire every year, and every day that passes risks additional and unnecessary cost. There are, I know, members of this Parliament who have been contacted by people who are quite worried about, well, they're welcoming of the new regime. They're quite keen on resource management reform. In fact, they're very keen on resource management reform. But that is a few months away. It's a while. Well, it's not a while away, but it's not tomorrow. If only that was true. But it will be sort of mid next year, depending on progress through the Environment Committee, who I'm sure will do a good job. But there's a bunch of people out there who are pretty worried about what happens in the interim, and so this bill provides that certainty and that relief for them. So it's a practical solution to a temporary challenge, and it reflects the government's commitment to a smooth transition. And I won't belabour the point, but that there is provisions in the Planning Bill and the National Environment Bill, which members I'm sure will want to consider in due course, that allow for quite a smooth transition as the bill is passed and into the transition phase between 2026 and 2029. But in the interim, this provides some certainty for people, and I think it will be widely welcomed in the community. Thank you, sir.
The question is the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's very sad that we are once again in this House in an all-stages urgency bill, a bill that we have only seen this afternoon, a departmental disclosure statement that we have just picked up off the table now, because in the Minister's press release that came out this afternoon, the link did not work. But it is quick reading, Mr Speaker, because it just says no, 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 no. Has there been a regulatory impact statement? No. Has there been a proper analysis of how many consents this will apply to? No. No, 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 no. That's all we see in this report. So we're asking why this bill needs to be in all stages urgency, and how many consents it is going to affect, because we don't get that in this departmental disclosure statement. And we just heard from the Minister. He said there's no cost to this bill. It's totally fine. What, Mr Speaker, are the costs to the environment? That is the main and most important question that we will be traversing in the committee stage and during these speeches as we find out more about this bill. And he says, well, it's very short. That does not mean that it is not important, Mr Speaker. So what are the costs to the environment? And we've heard that it means that consents that are due to lapse, they get to continue on, and surely that's a fine thing. But Mr Speaker, the types of consents that we're talking about here, I think, but I'm not entirely sure because of course there's been no analysis, is these are most likely to be consents that regional councils undertake or that they administer for discharges to water, for taking water. So that relates to irrigation, it relates to hydro dams, it relates to drinking water. A whole lot of very important issues there. Also putting pollution into waterways. Those are the sorts of things that you have consents for. Also air discharges. We know that we have problems with air quality in New Zealand, and just last week in Scrutiny Week I was asking the Ministry for the Environment what's happened with the National Direction on Air Standards that our government was working on over 2 years ago now, and this government still hasn't put out anything on when we know that air quality affects our health. So these are important issues that the types of consents that are in this bill will relate to. Also coastal marine environment, that is also relevant. And the Minister might like to spend some more time in his second reading describing the types of consents that he thinks will be affected by this bill. Land use consents, Mr. Speaker, are ones administered by territorial authorities. So you might need a land use to build